No one paid attention to the older woman who pushed a small cleaning cart through the bright hallways of Sterling Tech. The employees rushed past her with coffee cups, phone calls, and busy faces to them. She was invisible, just another cleaner wiping tables and emptying bins. But she was not who they thought she was. Her name was Martha Ellis, and she was the mother of the company's CEO. Jordan Ellis, she had not come to clean, she had come to watch. Jordan was one of the youngest black CEOs in the city. He worked hard, built his career with discipline, and treated everyone with respect. But recently, he had received troubling complaints. Someone wrote that managers were rude to junior staff. Supervisors ignored mistreatment, and certain employees acted like they owned the place. No names were mentioned, only clues. Jordan wanted the truth, and the only person he trusted to find it was his mother. Martha had raised him alone after losing her husband early. She worked long days in hospitals and cleaned offices at night. She understood struggle. She understood people. She also knew how power could change a person. That was why she agreed to help. People show their real face when they think no one important is watching, she told her son the next morning. She dressed in simple clothes, tied her gray hair in a bun, and walked into the company as a part-time cleaner from the moment she arrived. She began to notice everything. At the front desk, the young receptionist kept scrolling on her phone. When Martha politely asked for directions to the supply room, the receptionist didn't even look up. She pointed somewhere to the left and sighed loudly, as if Martha were disturbing her peace. Martha thanked her with a small smile, but she wrote the behavior in her mind like a quiet note. On the second floor, she passed 3 men in suits. One of them looked at her cart and laughed. "These cleaners always block the path," he said, not caring that she could hear him. Another added, "Yeah, they should stay out of the way." They didn't even slow down. Martha kept her calm, wiping the wall near the elevator as if she hadn't heard them. But inside, she was marking each detail carefully. Not everyone behaved badly. In the design department, a young woman named Grace held a door open for her and smiled kindly. "Take your time," she said. "My grandmother used to clean offices too." The way she said it was gentle and respectful. Martha felt a small warmth in her chest. It reminded her that kindness still existed, even in places full of ego and pressure. Later, when she entered the break room, she saw something that troubled her deeply. A senior manager named Bradley was shouting at a young assistant. The assistant's hands were shaking as he tried to explain something, but Bradley cut him off sharply. "Do your job properly, or you're out," he barked. Then he turned to Martha and snapped. "Clean this table and don't touch anything on my side." He spoke to her like she was nothing, like she didn't deserve basic respect. Martha nodded softly, but her eyes followed him as he walked away. She had seen men like him before, men who used their title like a weapon throughout the day. She saw more signs of the truth Jordan suspected. She saw a group of supervisors gossiping about junior staff, blaming them for mistakes they didn't make. She heard a manager mocking a customer behind their back, and she watched a team leader push all his workload onto interns while he relaxed in his office. Each moment added weight to her notebook of observations. But the most painful moment came near the executive wing. 2 employees were whispering near the staircase. They didn't know Martha was close enough to hear. "You know why he's CEO, right?" One said the board wanted a young black face to look modern. The other laughed quietly. "Image matters more than skill now." Their words hit Martha hard. She felt something tighten in her chest. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and raised her son with dignity. To hear people speak about him like that, she didn't react. She kept wiping the railing slowly. But her heart was heavy. By evening, Martha returned her cleaning cart, Elise. An intern who had been kind to her earlier waved at her with a bright smile. "Have a safe evening," she said. That small kindness felt like a light in a long, dark hallway. But it wasn't enough to erase what Martha had seen that day. She stepped outside into the cool air, took a deep breath, and looked at the tall building in front of her. She had come to observe quietly, but what she discovered could not be ignored. Tomorrow, she would return. But she would not stay silent for long. Many would be rewarded, many would be exposed, and a few would be gone forever. She whispered softly, They think no one is watching. But she was watching, and she was ready when Martha arrived the next morning. She walked through the lobby with the same quiet steps. But today she wasn't only observing, she was testing. She wanted to see if yesterday's behavior was a one-time thing or a deeper problem inside Sterling Tech. She pushed her cart slowly, stopping near people who didn't notice her, watching how they treated her when they believed she was just another cleaner in the background. The first test came earlier than she expected. Near the elevators, she approached a small group of employees waiting to go up. She stood behind them politely, holding her cart steady. A tall man in a gray suit glanced at her and frowned. "Take the next one," he said with irritation. "This one is full," but the elevator wasn't full at all. There was enough space for 3 more people. Martha thanked him softly, then stepped aside. The doors closed, and she watched their reflections fade. She wrote his behavior in her mental notebook. People showed their nature in small moments like this. When she reached the 4th floor, she purposely spilled a tiny amount of cleaning solution near the hallway. Nothing dangerous, just a small puddle. She wanted to see how people reacted. Would they warn her, help her, or step around her like she didn't exist? Within minutes, a group of employees passed by. One woman in heels walked right through the puddle and muttered, "These cleaners don't know basic safety," even though she caused the splash herself. Another man stepped over it with an annoyed grunt. Neither offered help nor asked if she needed anything. Only one young intern stopped, pointed at the puddle, and said gently, "Be careful here, ma'am." He even walked to get her a paper towel. His name badge read Samuel. Martha smiled warmly at him. "Thank you," she said. That moment stood out like a bright spot in a dim room. Later, Martha entered the conference room to wipe the tables before a big morning meeting. Several supervisors were already inside, preparing their documents. One of them, a woman named Lacey, gave her a cold look. "Can't you do this later?" She snapped, "We have an important meeting." Martha looked at her calmly. "I was told to clean before the meeting starts," she replied. Lacey rolled her eyes and whispered loudly to the others, "This is why we need better staff." Her tone stung, not because it hurt Martha personally, but because it showed how people in power forgot simple respect. But something interesting happened a moment later. A man walked in with a laptop. He noticed Martha wiping the edge of the table and moved his things to give her space. "Good morning," he said with sincerity. It was the first greeting she had received all day. His name tag said David. He didn't treat her like she was invisible. He even smiled when she passed him. Martha made a mental note of him too. In a place filled with arrogance, simple kindness stood out like gold. By noon, Martha had tested enough people to understand the difference between genuine respect and fake politeness. Some employees were good at pretending when others were around, but their real behavior slipped through when they thought no one important was watching. She saw a supervisor scolding an intern for a mistake he didn't make, then smiling sweetly when another manager walked by. She watched a pair of employees act friendly to clients on the phone, then insult them the moment they hung up. The building was full of masks, and she was slowly lifting each one. When lunchtime arrived, Martha went to the cafeteria. She sat alone at a small side table, peeling an orange slowly. She wanted to observe how employees behaved in a relaxed setting. A group of workers sat nearby, talking loudly. One of them pointed at her and said, "I heard they're hiring cheaper cleaners now." Another laughed and responded, "Good, maybe these ones will actually know how to clean." Their words carried no shame, no hesitation. They assumed she had no power, no voice, no reason to defend herself. Martha kept eating quietly, but inside she felt a quiet fire building. Still, kindness found its way even here. Elise, the same intern from yesterday, approached her with a warm smile. "Did you get lunch yet?" she asked. Martha nodded. Elise placed a small pack of biscuits on the table. "Just in case," she said before leaving. Martha watched her walk away, grateful that goodness still survived in this building, even if it was rare. In the afternoon, Martha walked into the HR office pretending to deliver cleaning supplies. She overheard 2 HR employees whispering, "We keep getting complaints about the managers on the 4th floor," one said. "But without proof, the CEO won't do anything." The other replied, "Even if he wants to, the board protects those managers." Their words made Martha pause. The problem was bigger than rude comments. It was a culture protected by people in high positions. a culture her son was trying to fix without knowing how deep the roots went. When her shift ended, Martha stood outside the tall building again. The sun was low, the air cool. She looked up at the glass windows. Thinking about everything she had seen that day, this wasn't just about rude employees. It was about a system that allowed disrespect to grow quietly. Like weeds, no one wanted to pull, she whispered to herself. Tomorrow, I test the leaders, because if the top was rotten, everything below would fall eventually. When Martha walked into Sterling Tech on the third morning, she wasn't just a quiet observer anymore. She was a storm gathering silently, preparing to see what the leaders did when they thought no one important was near. She had seen how regular employees behaved, but today she wanted to see the people her son trusted the most. The ones who sat in the glass offices, the ones who made decisions, the ones whose choices shaped the whole company. She pushed her cleaning cart toward the executive floor. Moving slowly, her uniform looked the same, but her mind was sharper than ever. Before entering the hallway, she purposely dropped her mop bucket. The water spilled across the shiny floor. Her goal wasn't to make a mess, but to see how leaders reacted to an inconvenience caused by someone they believed was below them. The first person to walk out was a middle-aged director named Morgan. He looked down at the water and let out an annoyed sigh. "Do you cleaners ever pay attention?" he said coldly. Unbelievable, he walked around the puddle and continued on without offering help. Not even a single word of courtesy. Martha apologized softly, but he didn't bother to look back. She made a mental note. He was one of the people Jordan had once praised for professionalism. A moment later, another leader stepped out. This time it was Director Hannah Lee. Known for her serious personality, she stopped when she saw the puddle. But instead of complaining, she walked toward Martha. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. She helped her lift the bucket upright and grabbed a few tissues from her office. "Take your time," she added with a supportive smile. Martha felt a warm gratitude. Real leadership didn't need a title. It showed in small moments like this. She quietly stored Hannah's name under the list of people worth keeping after cleaning the spill. She walked into the boardroom to dust the shelves before a leadership meeting. The room was empty, but she could hear voices coming from the connected conference hallway. She didn't mean to listen, but the words reached her clearly. "The CEO is too soft," someone said. "We need tougher rules," another voice added. "He wastes time worrying about staff feelings." Then a third man laughed. "The board only picked him because he makes the company look progressive." Martha froze for a second. Her fingers tightened around the cloth. Those were the leaders. The people who smiled at her son in meetings and stood beside him during company events. Yet behind closed doors, they talked as if he was only a decoration. A face to impress investors, she kept dusting calmly. Even though inside she felt a heavy ache. She had raised Jordan to work harder than anyone else, to lead with kindness, not cruelty. To hear his own leadership team speak about him like that cut deeper than she expected. But this wasn't the moment to reveal herself. This was the moment to collect truth, truth she would deliver soon. When the leaders entered the boardroom for their meeting, Martha stayed in a corner, finishing her task. Most ignored her, as if she were part of the furniture. A few stepped around her without acknowledging her presence. But one person stood out. It was the CFO. A calm man named Russell. He greeted her kindly and asked if the cleaning product smelled too strong for the room. He didn't treat her like she was invisible. Martha nodded and moved aside. She watched him carefully. Good people existed, but they were fewer than she hoped. As the meeting started, Martha left quietly, but she stayed near the hallway for a moment. The glass walls allowed her to see the leaders inside. Their faces were serious, their gestures sharp. Some argued, some whispered, and she understood why the company felt unstable. Leadership wasn't a team working together. It was a room full of people, protecting their own power. After leaving the executive floor, she continued her rounds, but something unusual happened near the IT department. She saw a young woman crying quietly at her desk. Her shoulders shook as she tried to hide her tears. Martha walked closer. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The woman wiped her face quickly. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice trembled. After a moment, she spoke again. "My supervisor blamed me for a mistake he made. She looked around nervously. "If I say anything, they'll fire me." Martha placed a soft hand on her shoulder. "You deserve to be treated with respect," she said. The woman didn't know she was talking to someone who could change her future in one day. But Martha knew the weight of everything she had seen was building. Every rude comment, every act of disrespect, every hidden cruelty, every insult thrown at her son, each one was a spark, and soon the fire would come. When her shift ended, Martha walked outside. But today, she didn't feel tired. She felt determined. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just test people. Tomorrow, she would start exposing them. One by one, with truth sharper than any title. She looked up at the building and whispered, "Your masks are slipping," and she was ready to pull them off completely by the fourth morning. Martha no longer entered Sterling Tech like a quiet cleaner blending into the walls. She walked through the glass doors with purpose. Calm on the outside but carrying a storm inside. She had enough proof to understand the culture in the building, but today she wanted something deeper. She wanted to see what people did when they thought a cleaner was in the way, when they believed no one important was taking notes. She wanted their real faces, not their polite office smiles. The moment she reached the second floor, she heard raised voices near the copy room. She moved closer and found a junior employee named Daniel, standing nervously while a supervisor. Miss Carter pointed at him angrily. "You printed the wrong documents again," she snapped. "Do you ever do anything right?" Daniel apologized, explaining that the file he received was mislabeled, but Miss Carter cut him off sharply. "Don't blame others for your incompetence." Then she turned to Martha, who had just stepped in. "Clean this mess. And try not to make things worse," she said. Treating her like a burden, Martha bent down to pick up a stack of papers. But her eyes stayed on Daniel. She could see the fear in his expression, the way he swallowed his frustration, the way he forced a nod that didn't belong to a person with dignity. It was the kind of pain that stayed quiet until someone cared enough to listen. When Ms. Carter left, Daniel whispered, "I'm sorry you had to hear that." Martha shook her head gently. "No one deserves to be spoken to like that." His eyes softened with surprise. As if he wasn't used to kindness, that moment stayed with her. It reminded her of the many people who lacked power in this building. People who were good workers but trapped by bad leadership. Later, Martha moved toward the finance wing, where the environment always felt tense. She had noticed it on earlier days. Today she pretended to wipe the counters near the entrance, but she was listening. A group of employees were gathered around a table, talking in low voices. "I heard the CEO is planning another staff review," one said nervously. "Good," another replied harshly. "He needs to clean out useless people." Then a man with a smirk added, "He won't touch management, though. Those positions are safe." They laughed quietly, thinking they knew how the world worked. Martha kept her face calm, but inside she felt something shift. They were wrong. They didn't know what was coming. Just before lunch, she entered the HR floor, carrying a small trash bag. She saw the HR head, Mrs. Porter, standing near the glass door. Whispering with another staff member, "We got new complaints," the woman said. "But we can't push anything without higher approval." Mrs. Porter sighed. "The board protects too many people." Her voice held frustration, but also fear. Martha listened carefully. She realized something important. HR wasn't blind. They were trapped behind higher powers too. Her mission wasn't only to expose individuals. It was to free the silent ones who wanted change but had no authority to act. During her break, Martha sat outside on a bench near the small company garden. It was a quiet place where employees rarely came. She watched the building carefully, wondering how many more truths were waiting behind those glass walls. A moment later, Elise the kind intern saw her and walked over. "Rough day?" Elise asked. Martha nodded. "A learning day," she said. Elise sat beside her and shared a small chocolate bar. She whispered. "People treat you differently when they think you have no power." Martha looked at her with interest. Elise continued. "But my mom always said a person's true nature shows in how they treat someone who can't do anything for them." Martha smiled slowly. Those words were familiar. They were the same ones she had taught Jordan years ago after her break. Martha headed to the top floor to clean the hall outside the strategy meeting room. When she arrived, she found several high-ranking executives talking. They didn't stop when she approached. "The CEO is losing control," one said sharply. "Too many complaints," another added. "We should recommend a leadership adjustment." Then a third voice said something that made Martha's hands freeze in midair. "If he becomes a problem, the board can move him out quietly." They said it casually. Asterisk. Like moving office furniture, Martha kept wiping the wall. But her heart pounded slowly. These were not just disrespectful leaders. They were plotting against her son. They didn't know the cleaner behind them was his mother. They didn't know she was listening. They didn't know they had already sealed their fate with those words. Before leaving the floor, she passed the assistant of one of the executives. The young woman looked exhausted and anxious. Martha asked softly, "Are you all right?" The assistant hesitated, then whispered, "They blame me for mistakes they make." She looked around nervously. "I can't defend myself. I need this job." Martha felt a wave of sympathy. She had been that woman once, working long hours, taking blame to keep food on the table. This building was full of people like her, suffering quietly because they couldn't afford to lose income. When the day ended, Martha stood outside the building again. But today felt different. The air around her felt heavier, charged with truth and tension. She had come expecting to see small problems, but what she uncovered was a culture of arrogance, fear, and hidden betrayal. A culture that reached all the way to the top. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Tomorrow, the truth begins." Because she wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. She was preparing to change everything by the 5th morning. Martha felt a weight pressing on her chest as she stepped into Sterling Tech. It wasn't fear, it was the ache of knowing too much. For days, she had watched arrogance grow like a stain on the company walls. She had seen workers cry quietly, leaders insult juniors, and executives plot behind her son's back. She had walked through every corner of the building as a cleaner. But inside, she carried the eyes of a mother, a judge, and a witness. Today was the day she would begin to bring the truth to light. But first, she had one more task. She needed to test one thing she hadn't tested yet. Loyalty. Martha started her morning on the 3rd floor. Where the marketing team worked, she purposely dropped her key ring near a group of employees. It scattered loudly across the floor. The workers turned, some smirked, one whispered, "Clumsy," but one young woman bent down immediately to help her. It was Grace, the kind employee she had seen earlier in the week. Grace handed her the keys and said softly, "Everyone drops things sometimes." Martha thanked her, and inside she felt a quiet confirmation. Some hearts were genuine, even in a polluted environment. As Martha walked toward the break room, she heard laughter, but it wasn't friendly laughter. It was sharp, mocking. She stepped inside and saw 3 supervisors sitting at a table. They were looking at a photo on someone's phone. "This is the cleaner from yesterday." One said, "She walks so slow." Another added, "I bet she doesn't even know how to read." They laughed again, louder this time. Martha walked past them with steady steps, but inside something cracked. She had endured disrespect all week, but the cruelty felt different today. It wasn't about her. It was about what this building had become. She kept walking. The voices followed her like shadows when she reached the hallway. She leaned against her cart for a moment. She wasn't hurt. She was disappointed. Her son had built this company with the dream of creating a place where people felt safe and valued. But corruption had seeped in quietly, and now arrogance ran freely through the halls. Later, she made her way to the executive floor for what she believed would be the most important test of the day. When she arrived, she pretended to wipe the glass walls. The executives inside were preparing for a private meeting. Martha wanted to see one thing. Would any of them treat her with the basic respect she deserved? She stayed near the door as they arrived, one by one. The first was Morgan, the director who had criticized her spill the previous day. He walked past without looking at her, tapping loudly on his phone. Then came Lacey, raised her eyebrow and gave her a dismissive wave. "Move your cart," she said sharply. Next came 2 executives deep in conversation, speaking about cutting junior staff to save money while keeping bonuses for senior management. They didn't even pause when she struggled to move the heavy cart out of their way. Finally, Russell, the CFO, walked in, he noticed her immediately. "How are you today?" he asked kindly. His tone was sincere, not forced. Martha nodded gently. He gave her a small smile before entering the meeting room. He was one of the few genuine leaders she had seen all week, someone worth keeping when the storm arrived. As the meeting continued behind the glass walls, Martha stayed near the door. Suddenly she heard something that made her blood run cold. Morgan's voice rose above the others. "If the CEO doesn't step up," he said, "we'll push for the board to reconsider his position." Another replied, "He's too soft. He focuses too much on staff issues." A third added, "He'll never fire us. He lacks the courage." They laughed lightly, believing their words were safe behind the walls. Martha felt her hands tighten around the handle of the cart. She didn't feel fear. She felt anger, calm, sharp anger. These men had no idea who their cleaner really was. They didn't know they were speaking against the mother of the CEO. The same mother who had raised him with strength they could never measure. Later in the afternoon, Martha walked into the HR department with a purpose. This time she wasn't cleaning. She needed information. She approached a young HR employee named Naya, someone she had observed quietly for days. Nia always treated everyone with respect, even cleaners. Martha picked up a piece of trash from the floor and said softly, "Thank you for always being kind." Nia looked confused, but smiled warmly. "Everyone deserves kindness," she replied. Martha studied her for a moment, then asked carefully, "If someone powerful is doing harm, who do you report it to?" Nia lowered her voice and said, "Officially to the board, unofficially to someone who actually cares." Martha nodded slowly. That was what she needed, someone who cared, someone who would stand with truth when the time came. When her shift ended, Martha walked out of the building slower than usual. The evening air felt heavy but clear. She looked up at Sterling Tech, the company her son had built with honest dreams. She whispered to herself, "Enough silence." She had seen enough truth to fill a book, enough cruelty to demand change, enough betrayal to break any mother's heart. But she wasn't broken. She was ready. Tomorrow, she wouldn't walk in as a silent cleaner. Tomorrow, she would begin revealing everything. And the people who thought she was invisible would soon learn who she really was. Because the mother no one noticed was about to change their lives forever. When Martha arrived on the 6th morning, she felt something different in the air. It wasn't fear, it wasn't tension, it was certainty. She had watched quietly for days. Carrying a notebook of truth that no one knew existed, she had seen the silent suffering of interns, the arrogance of supervisors, the hidden cruelty of managers, and the betrayal whispered behind her son's name. Today she wasn't gathering more evidence. Today she was preparing the ground for what would soon come like a wave they couldn't stop. She started her day in the employee lounge, a place always filled with gossip wrapped in coffee steam. She stood near the vending machine wiping the counter. A group of workers entered, laughing loudly. "Did you hear?" one said. "They're saying the CEO might get replaced." Another added, "Good. Someone stronger should lead." A third shrugged. "He's too soft to fire anyone important." They didn't know the cleaner behind them had heard far worse things. They didn't know she was the storm behind the door they kept mocking. Martha kept wiping calmly, but her mind was sharper than a blade. Every careless word was fuel for the fire she was building. As she walked toward the HR wing, she passed Grace, who gave her a warm smile. "You're working hard again," Grace said kindly. Martha nodded. "Everyone works hard," she replied. Grace hesitated, then whispered, "If you ever feel mistreated, you can talk to HR." Martha studied her gently. "Would they listen?" she asked. Grace bit her lip. "Some would." She answered softly, "Not all, but some." That small truth mattered. It meant there were still pieces of honesty inside the building, pieces worth saving. When Martha reached the 4th floor, she stopped near the office of Miss Carter, the supervisor who had humiliated Daniel. She pretended to dust the shelf while listening. Ms. Carter was complaining loudly on the phone. "These juniors can't do anything right," she said. "If they mess up again, I'm firing someone just to make a point." Martha raised her eyebrows slightly. She had heard of leaders motivating through fear. But this was something else. This was a person who enjoyed power too much, enjoyed seeing others afraid, enjoyed creating pressure instead of growth. Martha made another mental note. Some people deserved correction, but others deserved dismissal, sharp and immediate, later. She walked into the IT department, where she saw the young woman who cried earlier in the week. Today, the woman looked pale and tired. Typing fast like someone racing against the clock, Martha approached her slowly. "You look exhausted," she said kindly. The woman sighed. "My supervisor gave me a task that usually takes a week." She whispered, "He wants it done in a day." Martha placed a gentle hand on her desk. "You're trying your best," she said. The woman looked up with grateful eyes. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. Martha nodded softly. She wasn't just collecting stories anymore. She was helping people breathe even for a few seconds, and those seconds mattered as the day went on. Martha kept walking, testing, observing. But today something unusual happened. People were beginning to notice her, not who she really was, but the quiet strength she carried. Some employees moved aside respectfully. Some greeted her. Even those who had mocked her earlier lowered their voices when she passed. It wasn't kindness, it was suspicion. They sensed something shifting. They just didn't know what. But she knew. The walls of Sterling Tech were starting to speak. Finally echoing the truth she had collected for almost a week. Around noon, Martha stepped inside the elevator to go to the top floor. Just as the doors were closing, Morgan, the arrogant director, rushed in. He didn't look at her, but he made a phone call that revealed more than he intended. "We need to control the narrative," he said loudly. "If someone is investigating us, we'll handle it." He paused. Then added, "The CEO is clueless. He trusts too many people." Martha stared at him with calm eyes. He had no idea how close the truth stood beside him. No idea that the person he ignored was the very reason his world was about to shake. When the elevator reached the executive floor, he stepped out without a glance. Martha watched him walk away, then whispered quietly, "Enjoy these steps while you can." She had no anger in her voice. Only certainty his downfall wouldn't be emotional. It would be factual, professional, and irreversible. That afternoon, she visited Nia in HR again. This time with purpose, she asked gently if an employee had proof of serious misconduct among leaders. What should they do? Nia froze, then chose her words carefully. "If it's strong proof," she whispered, "it goes directly to the CEO. Or to the board if the CEO is compromised." Martha nodded slowly. "And what if the CEO is not compromised, only unaware?" Nia blinked, confused. "Then the CEO needs to see it first," she said firmly. Martha smiled gently. "That's what I needed to know," she replied. Nia didn't understand the importance of that moment, but she would soon, when her shift ended. Martha walked out of the building with a new clarity. For days she had watched silently, but silence was no longer her role. She wasn't just a cleaner gathering dirt from floors. She was a mother gathering truth from the shadows. And tomorrow would be the day she handed that truth to the one person who deserved it most. She whispered into the evening air, "Tomorrow. I speak to my son," and when she spoke, the company would never be the same again. The seventh morning arrived with a quiet heaviness. Martha stood outside Sterling Tech for a long moment before walking in. She had spent almost a week collecting the truth every corner tried to hide. But today she wasn't here as a cleaner gathering secrets. Today she was here as a mother carrying justice. Her son deserved to know the hidden rot growing under his leadership. The employees who suffered deserved someone brave enough to speak for them. And the arrogant ones who mocked, insulted, and plotted deserved the consequences, walking toward them with steady steps. She walked inside with her cart one last time, but she didn't push it toward the floor she normally cleaned. Instead, she went straight to the elevator that led to the top level. The executive floor where her son's office waited. The receptionist barely noticed her at first, until the elevator doors opened and Martha stepped inside. Only then did the woman sit up straighter, sensing something strange, but before she could speak, the doors closed with a soft chime. When Martha reached the executive hallway, she didn't hesitate. She walked toward Jordan's office with slow, steady confidence, The security guard at the door frowned. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," he said. Martha looked at him calmly. "Tell him his mother is here," she replied. The guard blinked as if he'd heard wrong, but after a few seconds, he stepped inside and delivered the message. A moment later, Jordan himself opened the door. His face shifted from confusion to shock the instant he saw her in the cleaner's uniform. "Mom," he whispered, "what are you doing here?" Martha stepped inside quietly, closed the door gently, and set her cleaning gloves on the desk. "I'm here to tell you everything," she said. Jordan guided her to a seat, his expression tight with worry. She could see the young boy he once was. Always afraid she worked too hard, always grateful she believed in him. And now he looked at her like he feared she had been hurt. Martha opened her notebook. Pages filled with observations, names, dates, and incidents she could never forget. She started from the beginning. Her voice was steady as she described the receptionist's disrespect, the mocking supervisors, the crying employees, the gossip, the fear, the arrogance. She told him about Daniel and the assistant who took blame for her boss. She described Grace and Elise, the few bright sparks of kindness. Then she told him about Morgan and the executives plotting behind his back. Word for word, tone for tone, expression for expression. Jordan listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched slowly, and his eyes darkened with disbelief that shifted into anger. Not the loud kind, but the silent, controlled kind that meant action was coming. When Martha finished, he didn't speak for a long moment. He stared at the window. The city stretched beneath him like a map of decisions he had made. Finally, he turned to her. "You saw all this by yourself?" he asked quietly. Martha nodded. "I saw it because I walked the halls the way people forget to watch," she said. "I saw it because they thought I didn't matter." Jordan stood, walked to his desk, and pressed a button on the phone. "Call an emergency leadership meeting," he said sharply. His assistant on the other end hesitated. "For today, sir?" she asked. "For the next hour," he replied. His voice carried a firmness Martha had not seen in a while. He turned back to his mother and said, "Stay." "I want you to be there," Martha shook her head. "No," she said softly. "My role was to show you the truth. Your role is to decide what happens next an hour later." The leaders gathered in the large conference room, their faces confused, some annoyed, others nervous. They whispered among themselves as Jordan entered. Standing tall with a calm expression that hid the storm inside when the room fell silent, he placed his mother's notebook on the table. "This," he said, "is a report from someone who saw how you behave when you think no one is watching." The leaders shifted. Some stiffening, some swallowing hard. Morgan smirked slightly, unaware of the storm about to break. Jordan's voice was steady as he spoke for days. "Each of you has shown your true nature," he said. "And someone you overlooked wrote down everything." The room went quiet. Then Jordan added the words that hit them like a slap. "My mother was the cleaner." Gasps spread across the room. Chairs shifted, eyes widened. Morgan went pale. Lacey stared at the table. Others avoided looking at each other. Shame and fear clung to the air like thick smoke. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Some of you will be dismissed today," he said. "Some will face suspension, and some will stay. Because they proved their character." He paused, letting the weight sink in. "But the culture of this company changes today, outside the room." Martha stood in the hallway, listening to every word with a quiet heart. She wasn't here to watch their downfall. She was here to watch her son rise with truth behind him. She stepped away, knowing her work was done. She whispered to herself as she walked toward the exit. "They finally saw me, but more importantly, they finally saw themselves." And tomorrow would be the beginning of a company rebuilt on respect, honesty, and leadership worth following.